Got ourselves a long topic this time. We're talking about solving quadratics, and we actually have 4 methods that we need to look at for solving quadratics. So I've broken this one into 4 quote unquote episodes. This one's part A, solving quadratics by factoring. I'm going to assume that you already know how to do this because this is a standard part of any algebra course. So if you've taken even beginning algebra, you have done this at least at some point. The strategy is we get our quadratic in standard form, x squared x constant equals 0. The equals 0 is very important. And then we find 2 binomials that multiply together to be this. These 2 things have to multiply together to be x squared, so x and x is really the only option. And these 2 things have to multiply together to be 8, and they have to add together to be -6. So that's going to be -4 and -2. What we have here is a product of 2 things that ends up being 0. The only way that can happen is if one of these things is 0. So either x minus 4 is 0 or x minus 2 has to be 0. If these 2 multiplied together ends up being 0, then one of those 2 things has to be 0. And that gives us 2 very easy equations to solve. Just add 4 to both sides and we get x is equal to 4 from this one or 2 from that one. And those are our 2 solutions. 4 and 2 are the only 2 numbers that will make this expression equal to 0. Do a couple more. This one here is not in the right form, so we have to make sure it is in the right form. We have to have our x squared term, our x term, and we have to subtract 20 from both sides, so we have our number then equals 0. If we don't have it in this form, factoring will not work. Has to be x times x, and then 2 numbers that multiply to be 20. The signs are different because it's -20, so I have to add together to be 8, and that's going to be +10 and -2. Now this step where you write each thing equal to 0, I don't really care to see that or not. If you do a few of these, you should get used to it. Looking at this, you should know that if you set that equal to 0 and solve, you'll subtract 10 from both sides, and you get x is -10. Here, you know you'll add 2 to both sides, you get +2. Okay, so you can do that step if you like, but there's no need to. Couple special cases here. This one has no constant term. So if I want it in standard form, 9x squared plus 18x equals 0. Has no third, just plain old number term, which means it's actually much easier to factor, because if there's no constant term, then x will factor out of whatever we have here, and so will 9 in this case. So we can factor out a 9x, and that'll leave us with x plus 2. Much easier to factor than undoing a trinomial. And then if we set 9x equal to 0 and divide both sides by 9, we'll get x is equal to 0. And x plus 2 equals 0. We subtract 2 from both sides and we will get -2 there. Okay, if you don't have a third term here, if you're missing your number term or your constant term, you can factor out an x along with possibly a number, and you'll get 2 answers. One will be 0, the other one will be a number. And then, because my math lab is evil, and I guess I didn't delete this one from the homework, I believe there's one that's a cubic that's assigned. It's got x cubed, or y cubed in this case, y squared, and y. First step here, just factor out the variable. So we got 3y squared minus 5y minus 2 equals 0. And that gives us a y term, and then a trinomial we should be able to factor. I'm not a fan of these. This is another thing I'm not going to put on a test, having you factor something that has a leading coefficient, because these can get a little bit tricky, a little bit difficult to do. But these 2 things have to multiply together to be 3y squared. 3y and y is the only option there. And these 2 things will have to multiply together to be -2, but they'll also have to combine when we FOIL to give us that -5. And in this case, that's going to mean we have 2 here that's negative and a +1 here. So when we FOIL, we'll get 3y squared minus 6y plus 1y. That's where we get the negative 5y from, and then the negative 2. Right, and then we set each of the 3 of these equal to 0. We get y equals 0 from the first one. Y equals, what we get here, if we set 3y plus 1 equal to 0, we'd subtract 1 and then divide by 3, so we get negative 1/3. And we get a positive 2 out of the third one. Okay, that's easy. It's a cubic, so typically it will have 3 solutions, just like our quadratics typically have 2 solutions. That's part 1 of this objective.